Ernie Pyle was born on August 3, 1900, south of Dana, Indiana, near the state's border with Illinois. The son of tenant farmers, Ernie had dreams of venturing far beyond the fields near home.
And Ernie didn't want to farm, didn't like looking at the south end of a northbound horse, and went to Indiana University to be a journalist. He wrote travel columns when he started his famous career, wandering the United States.
Pyle traveled the nation during the Depression era, when most people didn't have the means or roads to do so. Those stories became a 6 days a week national newspaper column, read coast to coast. But in 1940, his stories would change.
He was drawn to cover the Blitz in England and was sent by the Scripps Howard newspaper, so he was an official correspondent covering the British aspects of the war. And some people, scholarly people, say that that might have helped influence the American entry into the war.
When the Americans did arrive in Europe and North Africa, Pyle was there, usually with the infantry. This museum in Pyle's hometown shares the story of the boyhood hero and the war itself.
He would go up and typically sit around and talk to them for 2 or 3 or 4 days. He had a notebook in his pocket. He'd write down names and addresses, and then he would go back and write stories for his columns.
People describe Pyle's writings as receiving a letter back home from the front lines. Nearly 10% of the country's population were serving in the armed forces, so everyone knew someone fighting the war, and Pyle's columns shared those stories.
Here is the other side of the channel, Britain, an armed camp bristling with tanks and trucks and guns from the United States and Canada. Here is the fruition of 4 years of planning and production.
He went ashore 24 hours after D-Day and reported on what he saw.
Bodies of soldiers were washed out to sea and then brought back again. Pictures of girls and families staring up at him from the sand. The wreckage that he saw is just exactly what he wrote about. And it sure put a personal touch on the tragedy.
He covered the war in Europe and then moved on to the Pacific. In April of 1945, his stories of the common soldier fighting the war would come to an end, though.
He was with the 77th Infantry Division on an island called Ishima off the coast of Okinawa. He was riding with some officers and they came under machine gun fire. Everybody made it to the ditch safely, but he raised his head and he said, "Is everyone okay?" And he was killed.
Pyle had reported on the war from even before the U.S. entered the conflict. His columns were the link between the front lines and the soldiers' lives back home. Now the beloved writer was gone.
When he died, President Truman himself went on the radio to announce Ernie's death to the nation. He said the nation is once again saddened because Roosevelt had died about a week earlier. And he said no man in this war has told the story so well as the GIs wanted it told.
Ernie Pyle grew up in small-town America, yet his words touched the largest of stages. His articles, often about average, ordinary people, their struggles, their challenges, successes, and even dying. They are words that still touch our hearts today. Traveling the countryside in Dana, Indiana, I'm Andrew McCrae.